TCB here with a custom card art tutorial for you all. I'm going to be going over the materials and the processes used when I make an altered art card. So today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be altering this morphing jar. It's usually a card that is either popular right now, or I have an excess number of them, or like this, a star foil morphing jar. I mean, I could sell it on eBay for $1 or $2, which is all that it's worth, or I could turn it into some cool artwork. So whenever I approach a piece, I always look at it and I say, okay, what does this look like? I tend to start with Pokemon. You always want to do something that's pop culture or Pokemon or video game related, something that's really prominent within the Yu-Gi-Oh scene. So when I looked at Morphing Jar, I saw a cloister, so that is what I'm going to turn it into. For my materials, I use acrylic paints. Now this is just a rather terrible acrylic paint set that I got at a local thrift store. It was $4 or $5, came with an array of colors. I'm going to be searching around for a new paint to use. Off of the recommendation of Dragon Duelist Girl, I tried out these Liquitex Basics. Now these are kind of like a dumbed down version of acrylic paints. They're not very pigmented, which I don't like. I'm a fan of pigmented paints, paints that are really thick, because then you can use water to water them down. For my brushes, what I'm currently using is these guys. This is the biggest brush I use for most things. The paintbrush company is American Painter. Here are my other two. As you can see, this is the finest point of paintbrush that I have. This is what I use to do all of my lining. Whenever I'm painting in bigger areas of the card, this is what I use. And this is for medium range stuff. Now the purpose for an altered card is to kind of conform to the image that you're given, and as well as covering it without leaving too much of the original image intact. So there's two ways to get rid of this image. So a way that I've seen a lot of people do it is a technique called blading, which you take an X-Acto knife and you actually scrape away the ink. But I think it's inconsistent, and it just doesn't really necessarily fit my style for some reason. I mean, it certainly does work, but I just feel like it damaged the card so much more than the card needs to be damaged. So that's how blading works. Now the technique that you may have seen me use is I just cover the original image with white paint. So to do the line work, to map out where the white paint is going to go, I use a micro perm. It's a fine point marker, fine tip marker that is, and I use it to do any of my lining. So this is where Cloyster's face is going to go. And then around Cloyster he has a shell. The shell has spikes on it. There we go, so the entirety of the image is going to be covered. I then go in with white paint and just paint in all the line work that I did. So I've reached the point where the white is all over the image that it's going to cover. Now I have to let this dry, and then I have to do another layer of white after that. I know in my videos it looks like I'm just throwing white on white on white, but I usually do 3 layers and wait 5 to 10 minutes in between each layer to make sure that the first layer dries. Then what I do is I go in with my liner paintbrush I outline the piece. Really give it some shape. And I don't know if you can see it, but it doesn't make a completely black line on the first pass. I need to find a black that has a lot more pigment. Because when you have paints with a lot of pigment, you can just water them down if you need to get a lighter tone. But with this, I find myself having to go over lines multiple times. And it's just a quality issue. If you buy better paints, you will get a better result. I'm not saying that if you were to buy amazing equipment, you're going to be immediately good at this. It does take time and practice. I'm just saying that with better equipment, you will get better results. With more experience, you'll also get better results. So if you combine those two, you can make some really awesome pieces. I feel like I'm held back a bit by the quality of things that I have. It just comes down to the fact that I'm poor and I need to buy better things and I just can't yet. I am a fan of these paintbrushes. I'll probably keep using these, but I really need to find a paint that works for me. So there you can see there's half of the shell lined. Now when you're doing this kind of stuff, I'm kind of just freehanding this cloister because I don't really care, to be honest. This is more of just a demonstration. But when you're freehanding this kind of stuff, it's always good to have a reference in front of you. I do not. I just have a rough idea of what cloister looks like. So as you can see, the black has dried, so I'm going to do a second pass of black. This is what I was referring to when I was saying that it's not heavily pigmented. A lot of blacks you could just pass this in one. You'd actually have to water it down with water in order to make it workable on the flat surface of a card, and you wouldn't have to do a double pass. But I suppose it's okay, because if you make a mistake, it's not as hard to get rid of, whereas a heavily pigmented black takes quite a few layers of white to cover it up. So we've got the center orb here, which is Cloister's head. You've got the two shells. You have an inner shell and an outer shell. And that's going to be his head spike right there. That'll be easier to see when the color starts getting put into it. For those of you who don't know, for my painting palette I like to use glass. I really like it because you can see right through it. So it really gives you a feeling of how pigmented the paints are and how your paint is mixing. So for Cloister's shell, it's purple. I don't have a purple paint, but purple is a mix of red and blue. And then we just need some black and some white. Black I've already had poured out. We got the white out now. That'll be used for highlights and lighten up the purple for certain parts. So I'm going to take my medium-sized paintbrush, I think. And I think I'll use my large one for right now. Do a bit of water. Water it down. Add some blue. Add some red. Bit too much red, add a bit more blue. when you're mixing, you always want to draw the color away from the large portion. So now I've got myself a nice purple right here at the end, and I'm just going to color right in. Now, you don't really have to obey the lines that much, because honestly, with most of my pieces, I always go over the line work one more time at the end just to make sure everything's good. And it's okay that I'm doing it all one color right now, because I'll go back in and add some different gradients a little bit later. So I've gone over the orb, the dark circle in the center, one more time. And I've done all this kind of the same purple. What I do after that, I'm going to go in with a smaller brush, add a bit of white to the purple I've mixed, and I'm going to go in and put some contrast. There we go. And for the inner shell, I'm going to go the exact opposite direction. I'm going to mix the same color purple, bit of red, bit of blue, and I'm going to throw some black in there to make a darker purple. Then for right underneath the orb, darkest purple of all, because that's looking into the shell. Now you may be looking at it and say, wow, that's just a big purple blob. Well, that's how a lot of my pieces are halfway through of it, you know? I'm going to actually go back in and do some more lining, because I want to define the things that were covered up by the purple. So now I've reached this part, I've got it pretty much outlined. I've got a lighter purple and a darker purple on the inside. I'm going to go in with an even lighter purple than what I have so far. Just need to mix it really quick. At this point, I would be more gentle to not infringe upon the black lines. I've reached the point where I don't want to do much line work anymore. And I'm just going to highlight ridges, and bumps. Now I'm going to come in with my white. I'm going to map out where the eyes of Cloyster are. Once again, I don't really have a reference for him. I'm just doing him kind of from memory, from what I remember. Pretty sure he had eyes somewhat like this. I could also be thinking of Ghastly though, so apologize if I'm wrong. And he has a mouth too. If I remember correctly, it's always in kind of like this smirking sneer looking thing. So I'm going to let that dry, and while that's drying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do white highlights on everything. White highlights are the accent that makes pieces pop. It's what separates light from dark, separates different pieces that are the same color from each other. In painting and in tattooing, I use white highlights a lot. So this is a good technique to give the illusion that this is round. you kind of have to shade like it's round. So I give it that kind of curved shine on it, so that way it gives the illusion that it is in fact round. So as you see here, I kind of made a mistake. I didn't want to put that as the white part. I wanted to do the inner part for the highlight. So I'm going to put the highlight there, as it should be. And then I'm just going to go in with purple again. And cover it up. See, that's why painting's great, because you can cover any mistakes you made. Whenever I fix mistakes, I usually always go back in with black to line it. Now I'm doing a lot of this rather hastily, just to give you like a rough idea of how I do things. Normally I would wait for a lot of these things to dry before I go right into them. So I'm going to trim up the white areas for the eyes and the mouth for Cloyster. Give him his little eyes. So that right there is how I do my card art. If I'm thinking about it a little bit more, I could probably put a white highlight in the base and right there to kind of orb out him. And if you wanted to make Cloyster doing an attack, you could make a ice beam coming out of his head. The horn is the source of his power after all. But yeah, if any of you guys have any more questions on how I do custom card art, let me know. Leave the questions in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.